The Galactic Accord was dying. Once it had been a beacon of unity, a vast coalition of thousands of species stretching across the stars, held together by fragile diplomacy and mutual survival. But none of that mattered now. The Vortun had come, and with them the slow, methodical death of every civilization in their path. They had no demands, no terms, no warnings. They simply arrived, their biomechanical warships emerging from the void between galaxies, an unstoppable wave of destruction that consumed everything in its path. Planetary defenses fell within hours. Accord fleets shattered like glass against their dark energy weapons, and for every ship the Accord managed to destroy, 10 more seemed to take its place. The Vortun did not wage war, they erased. The Grand Council of the Accord had retreated to the Dyson-class station Celestial Hope, their last great bastion, orbiting the black hole at the heart of the Perseus Veil. Here, among the remaining leaders of 1,000 worlds, a desperate meeting was held. For weeks they had debated, argued, and tried to find some solution to the crisis. There was none. Their greatest minds had failed. Their finest warriors had been crushed. Now only one option remained. A thin, withered being stood in the center of the council chamber, its translucent skin glowing faintly under the artificial lights. High Chancellor Virik, the last remaining authority of the once great Accord, turned his gaze toward the assembled delegates. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of a decision that could not be undone. "We must summon the Deathworlders." A hush fell over the chamber. No one spoke. No one even moved. The word alone was enough to send a cold shudder through every being in the room. Deathworlders. The species from nightmare planets. The ones who had survived where no life should exist. The ones the Accord had feared for centuries, for they did not abide by the rules of peace, of negotiation, of restraint. And at the top of that terrifying hierarchy, above all others, stood humanity. The name was rarely spoken in official Accord records. They had been exiled long ago, cast out into the abyss beyond known space. Their crime had not been aggression nor conquest. It had been something far worse. They had been too good at war. Humanity had been a part of the Accord once. They had fought side by side with its member species, protected them, bled for them. But when the Vortun first emerged over a century ago, it was humanity who had driven them back. Humanity who had burned their worlds and crushed their fleets with a level of violence that shook the entire galaxy. In the aftermath, the Accord had turned on them. "You are dangerous," they had said. "You are too willing to destroy." Humanity had not protested. They had simply left. And now, after all these years, after all the fear and condemnation, the same beings who had cast them out were begging for their help. Virik took a deep breath, then activated the ancient relay hidden beneath the council chamber, a beacon that had remained untouched for generations. A single transmission was sent, a desperate plea flung into the darkness of deep space. "Humans, we beg you, save us." There was no response. The days that followed were agonizing. Some within the Accord still clung to their hatred, convinced that humanity would never answer. Others simply believed that they would not come, that they would let the Accord burn for what they had done. The Vortun did not wait. Their advance continued, system by system, an inevitable tide of annihilation. The last remaining Accord fleets made their final stand at the edge of the Perseus Veil, a desperate effort to slow the enemy's approach. They lasted less than a day. The end had come. And then the message arrived. A single transmission, broadcast in every known language. "Request acknowledged." 2 words, that was all. For some it was a sentence of doom, for others a glimmer of hope. But before the debate could even begin, the stars themselves split open. The wormhole was unlike anything the Accord had ever seen. It did not ripple softly into existence like the artificial gates they used for travel. It tore into reality, a gaping wound in the fabric of space, crackling with barely contained energy. And from that wound they came. The fleet was unlike anything the Galactic Accord had ever fielded. Their ships did not gleam with the artistry of the Elari, nor hum with the elegant designs of the Yvonne. There was no beauty, no grace. These were war machines, built with one purpose: to kill. Jagged, predatory shapes of black metal, hulls that bore the scars of battles fought across countless star systems. Some were massive, dwarfing even the largest Accord dreadnoughts. Others were sleek and fast, built for maneuverability and ruthless efficiency. But it was the ship at the heart of the fleet that truly sent a chill through the council. A behemoth of dark steel, its very presence exuding an aura of death. No insignias, no markings, only a single name etched in brutal lettering along its hull. Oblivion's Wrath. A transmission cut through the void, forcing its way onto every open channel. The voice that spoke was deep, commanding, and utterly merciless. "This is Admiral Elias Rourke of the Terran Ascendancy. You called for us. Now, step aside. We will do what you could not." The Accord's highest military commanders scrambled to organize, to offer plans, to suggest strategies. Rourke ignored them. The humans had already decided. The Vortun fleet, sensing the arrival of a true enemy, adjusted its course. They had never feared the Accord. But once, long ago, they had feared the Deathworlders, and now the nightmares had returned. The battle began before the Vortun could react. Humanity did not fight like the Accord. They did not waste time with delicate formations or defensive posturing. They attacked. Railguns, firing slugs the size of skyscrapers at near relativistic speeds, ripped through Vortun warships, tearing them apart in a single shot. Kinetic bombardment shattered enemy carriers, their organic hulls unable to withstand the sheer force of impact. Swarms of human fighters darted through the chaos, their pilots executing maneuvers that no Accord species could survive. But it was not just the weapons that made the difference. It was the mindset. The Accord had always fought wars with the intent to survive, to hold the line, to endure. Humanity fought to win. They did not take prisoners, they did not retreat. Every shot was fired with precision, every strike calculated to inflict maximum devastation. They used scorched earth tactics, denying the Vortun any chance to regroup. They did not fight like an army, they fought like a force of nature. The battle that should have lasted weeks was over in hours. The Vortun had never known defeat, not truly, not since the last time humanity had stood against them. But now, as the remnants of their fleet scattered into the void, they understood something they had long forgotten: fear. Admiral Rourke watched from the bridge of Oblivion's Wrath, his expression unreadable. Around him, his officers stood silent, watching the debris drift through the void. "Status report," he said. "Minimal losses, 72 enemy vessels destroyed, 14 retreating. That's acceptable." The bridge crew barely had time to react before Rourke issued his next command. "Plot a course for the Vortun homeworld. We end this war, now." No negotiations, no warnings, no mercy. The Deathworlders had returned, and they would not stop until the galaxy was safe. The remnants of the Vortun fleet drifted in the silence of space, torn apart by the relentless assault of the Deathworlders. Across the battlefield, wreckage floated like the bones of fallen titans, the last echoes of a slaughter so absolute that even the surviving Accord ships could barely comprehend what they had witnessed. Where once the Galactic Accord had fought desperately for survival, clawing at the enemy with everything they had, the humans had arrived and torn through the invincible Vortun like they were nothing more than insects. On the bridge of Oblivion's Wrath, Admiral Elias Rourke stood with his hands behind his back, his expression impassive as he watched the last remnants of enemy vessels attempting to flee. Some of them twisted through space, trying to accelerate into emergency jumps, but the humans did not allow their prey to escape. He watched as one of the Vortun command ships, a massive biomechanical horror nearly 20 kilometers long, tried to vanish into a rupture of dark energy. A single volley from the dreadnought's rail batteries split it in half before it could finish its escape. The broken remains burned, the glow of ruptured containment cores illuminating the battlefield. The Accord had never fought like this. They had always believed in defense, in containment, in limiting damage where they could. Even in the face of total annihilation, they had hesitated to use their most destructive weapons, terrified of what such power could do. But humans had no such fear. Rourke turned his attention to the communication officers. "Send a message to the Accord leadership," he said. "Inform them that the enemy has been routed. The battle is over." One of the officers hesitated. "Admiral, what should we tell them about what comes next?" Rourke exhaled slowly, his gaze flicking to the swirling remains of the battle. They had done what the Accord could not, but he knew, even now, that they were feared. He could almost hear the whispered conversations in the halls of Celestial Hope, the way the alien diplomats would recoil at the efficiency, the brutality of what they had just witnessed. He knew exactly what they were thinking. They had traded one nightmare for another. "Tell them we're not done," Rourke said. "This was only the beginning." The transmission was sent. Across the remains of the Accord's last defense line, ships began to regroup, their battered crews staring out at the human fleet with something between awe and terror. The relief at their salvation was tainted by the realization that their saviors were unlike anything they had ever known. In the council chambers aboard Celestial Hope, chaos erupted. "They cannot be allowed to continue," one of the Alari representatives hissed, his translucent crest pulsing with agitation. "Do you not see what they've done? The sheer devastation. This is not war. This is annihilation." "They saved us," a Yvonne diplomat countered, their chitinous fingers twitching nervously. "Without them, we would all be dead. Are you suggesting we reject them?" "We should never have called them in the first place," a third voice snapped, this one belonging to a member of the Galactic Union. "They were exiled for a reason. The Deathworlders cannot be trusted." High Chancellor Virik sat at the head of the chamber, his gaze unreadable as he listened to the growing argument. He had expected this reaction. The moment he had given the order to summon the humans, he had known it would lead to this. The Accord had spent a century telling itself that they had done the right thing in exiling humanity, that it had been the only way to preserve galactic peace. Now, that illusion had been shattered. "The men will not stop," Virik finally said, his voice cutting through the noise. The other diplomats turned toward him, uneasy. "Admiral Rourke has already made his intent clear. The humans are not fighting to hold the line. They are going to end this war. Permanently." Silence followed his words. The Vortun had plagued the Accord for over a century, an enemy that had refused every attempt at negotiation, crushed every effort to resist them. The idea of winning, of truly eradicating them, had never even been a possibility. The Accord had never considered that it was something that could be done. But the Deathworlders had never fought a war for survival. They fought to win. As the council deliberated, the humans had already moved. Their fleet did not wait for permission. They did not ask for approval. By the time the council was even aware of what had happened, the Deathworlders were already gone, their ships streaking through the void toward the heart of the enemy's empire. The Vortun homeworld was a place the Accord had never even seen. Their fleets had never made it that far, and the few scouting expeditions that had tried had simply vanished. Their territory was vast, their technology a twisted nightmare of organic and mechanical horror, their worlds infested with living fortresses and war-forged abominations. But it didn't matter. The Deathworlders were coming. The first attack came without warning. The human fleet dropped into the system like a hammer from the void, their presence a sudden and violent tear through the fabric of reality. The Vortun, caught completely off guard, scrambled to react. Their home defense forces were massive, their fleets numbering in the thousands. For over a century, they had been the terror of the galaxy. But the Deathworlders had fought worse. The battle was not like anything the Accord had ever experienced. It was not a slow, grinding war of attrition, it was a slaughter. The Vortun ships, for all their horrific technology, were predictable. Their weapons relied on overwhelming force, their tactics centered around sheer, crushing numbers. Against the Accord, it had always been enough. But humans did not fight fair. Their ships moved like predators, striking in impossible patterns, exploiting every weakness, tearing through the enemy before they even had a chance to retaliate. Stealth frigates slipped past defensive lines, planting fusion bombs in critical locations. Heavy cruisers punched through formations with pinpoint kinetic strikes, leaving the enemy crippled and disorganized. AI-assisted targeting systems made sure every shot counted. And then, the final step. The Deathworlders did not just kill the Vortun. They hunted them. Ground forces landed, storming the planet's surface with terrifying precision. The Vortun had never been invaded before. Their world had never known the touch of war. But now the Deathworlders were here, and they moved through the cities like wraiths, sweeping through defenses, executing every last enemy without hesitation. The Accord had always fought wars with the belief that there were limits, rules that must be followed. The humans had no such illusions. The Vortun had never shown mercy, and they would receive none in return. Within days it was over. The enemy that had haunted the galaxy for generations was gone. Admiral Rourke stood among the ruins of the Vortun capital, his boots crunching against the charred remains of what had once been a civilization. His soldiers stood around him, silent, their weapons still hot from battle. Above them the sky burned, the last remnants of the Vortun war effort crumbling to nothing. A transmission came through from the Accord. He could already imagine what they would say. There would be protests, accusations, fear. They had always feared humans, and this would only make that fear worse. He activated the communicator. "The war is over," he said. A pause. Then the voice of High Chancellor Vierick. "Admiral, what have you done?" Rourke looked out over the ruins. The answer was obvious. "We won." For a long time there was only silence, the kind of silence that came when everything had changed, when an old world died and a new one was born. The Deathworlders had returned. And nothing would ever be the same again. The fires still burned. The Vortulin homeworld, once the center of terror and conquest, was now nothing more than a silent grave. The sky was choked with the smoke of burning cities, and the ground was littered with the corpses of a species that had, until now, never known the taste of defeat. Humans had made sure they would never forget it. Admiral Elias Rourke stood atop the highest ruin in what had once been the Vortun capital, looking down at the wreckage of an empire that had lasted for thousands of years. His armor was stained with dust and blood, his face unreadable as he surveyed the destruction. The air was thick with the scent of burning flesh and ionized metal, but none of it seemed to faze him. He had seen worse. His soldiers moved through the rubble below, efficient, methodical, finishing their grim work. Survivors, if they could even be called that, were dragged from hiding places and executed with the precision of a well-oiled war machine. Some begged in garbled, inhuman voices, others fought to the last breath, but the outcome was always the same. The Vortun had never given quarter to their enemies. Humanity saw no reason to offer them any now. A transmission crackled in his ear. "Admiral," came the voice of Commander Serrano, his second in command. "The last stronghold has fallen. Resistance is over." Rourke nodded, though there was no satisfaction in it. "Good. Begin the final sweep. We're making sure nothing remains." Serrano hesitated. "Sir, the Accord is demanding—" "I don't care what they demand," Rourke interrupted, his voice flat, cold. "They asked us to end this war. That's exactly what we're doing." Serrano did not argue. There was no point. The orders had already been given. The Vortun would not rise again. Rourke switched to the fleet-wide channel. "This is Admiral Rourke. The enemy is finished. No more warships, no more soldiers, no more threat. He paused, letting that truth settle over every last human soldier and pilot who had fought to make it real. We are not here to conquer. We are not here to occupy. We are here to erase. We finish the job. The command was simple. No survivors, no prisoners, no possibility of resurgence. Orbital bombardments began in earnest, leveling what little remained. The planet itself was dying, its infrastructure shattered, its atmosphere poisoned by the sheer scale of destruction. The Vortun had been a plague upon the galaxy. Now, they would be remembered only as ashes and dust. As the final waves of destruction rained down, a new transmission came through, this time from Celestial Hope. The Accord's highest leaders were demanding an immediate response. Rourke sighed. He had expected this. He stepped away from the wreckage, entering the command post his officers had set up in the ruins. The hollow screen flickered to life, and the faces of the Accord's ruling council stared back at him. Some looked horrified, others enraged. None of them, however, could hide the deeper emotion beneath it all. Fear. Admiral Rourke, High Chancellor Virick said, his voice carefully measured. What have you done? Rourke tilted his head slightly, as if the question itself was strange. I completed the mission you requested. You annihilated an entire species, Virick snapped, his usual composure cracking for the first time. This goes beyond war. This is genocide. They did it first, Rourke said simply. The other council members flinched at the casual way he spoke, as if wiping out an entire civilization was no different than clearing a battlefield. The Vorfun were beyond redemption, he continued. They didn't negotiate, they didn't surrender, they didn't stop. They would have done this to us, to all of you, without hesitation. And now we are supposed to celebrate? One of the other diplomats, a trembling Elari, stepped forward. How are you any different from them? Rourke finally let out a quiet breath, his patience wearing thin. We're different because we didn't start this war. But we finished it, and unlike them, we won't come back for more. Silence followed. The Accord leaders exchanged glances, unsure how to proceed. They had wanted salvation. They had gotten something else entirely. A nightmare that fought on their behalf. We can't allow this, Virick said finally. The Accord stands for peace, for restraint. What you've done here, it's beyond anything we can accept. Rourke chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. Then maybe that's why the Accord was losing. Virick bristled. Do you think we will simply allow you to continue unchecked? We exiled your people once before. Perhaps we should do so again. Rourke's gaze darkened. You didn't exile us, he said quietly. You begged us to leave because you were afraid, and now you've invited us back, knowing full well what we are. If you try to turn on us again, I promise you this. Next time, we won't leave. A slow chill settled over the chamber. Is that a threat? Virick whispered. No, Rourke replied. It's a reality check. The channel cut. For a long moment, Rourke stared at the empty screen. He knew what would happen next. The Accord would debate, they would deliberate, they would try to decide what to do about the monsters they had summoned to save them. And he didn't care. His job was done. Hours later, the fleet began its withdrawal. The last wave of bombardments ensured that the Vortun homeworld was no longer anything more than a dead rock, and every remaining outpost and ship had been hunted down and destroyed. There was nothing left. The galaxy was safe. But as Rourke stood on the bridge of Oblivion's wrath, watching the dying world shrink behind them, he knew that this war had changed more than just the enemy. The Accord had called them Deathworlders. They had feared them, and now that fear would only grow. They had been exiled once before, cast out because of what they were capable of. Rourke knew it was only a matter of time before the Accord tried to do it again. And next time, humanity wouldn't be so forgiving. A junior officer approached, standing at attention. "Sir, incoming message from Fleet Command. They want to know what our next course of action is." Rourke exhaled, looking out at the endless stars beyond the viewport. "The Accord will turn on us soon," he murmured. "They'll try to distance themselves, frame us as a necessary evil, then find a way to make sure we never hold this much power again." The officer hesitated. "What do we do?" Rourke smiled faintly. "We let them," he said, "for now." The humans had won the war. They had saved the galaxy. But deep down, Rourke knew the truth. The next war had already begun.